The wind howled across the ruins of what was once a united kingdom, carrying whispers of unfinished stories and unburied truths. Years after the fall of kings and queens, the memory of dragons still lingered in the bones of the land. The people had learned to live in a fragile peace, but beneath that quiet surface, old loyalties festered like wounds that never truly healed. The return would not be gentle, nor would it be welcomed by all. Rumors began as they always do, quiet murmurs in taverns, shadows crossing the narrow streets, a traveler claiming to have seen something impossible. At first, no one dared believe that the age of fire and blood could return, yet the stories grew stronger, more vivid, more detailed. A black-winged shape against the moon, a voice carried by the wind, something ancient awakening once more. In the north, where winter had once threatened to consume everything, a new unease settled over the forests and frozen lakes. The survivors of past horrors recognized the signs, the subtle shifts in nature that preceded chaos. Ravens flew in erratic patterns, wolves howled at nothing visible, and the cold seemed to creep in earlier each year. The past was not finished with them. Far to the south, politics resumed its deadly dance. Power never remains vacant for long, and new players emerged from obscurity, claiming rights, heritage, and destiny. Alliances formed in secret chambers, betrayals were planned over goblets of wine, and the throne, whether physical or symbolic, once again became the center of ambition. Peace had only been an intermission. Across the narrow sea, a forgotten lineage stirred. Those who had once been scattered and broken began to gather, drawn by something stronger than survival. They spoke of a prophecy not yet fulfilled, of a balance that had been disrupted rather than restored. Their return would not simply be about reclaiming power, but redefining the world itself. Magic, long suppressed and feared, began to seep back into the fabric of reality. It appeared first in small, almost dismissible ways, a flame that burned without fuel, a dream that foretold the future, a child born with eyes too old for their face. But soon it became undeniable. The age of reason was giving way once more to something far more dangerous. Old heroes, if they could still be called that, faced a new dilemma. They had fought, sacrificed, and survived only to be pulled back into conflict. Some resisted, clinging to the hope of a quiet life, while others felt the familiar call to action. The question was no longer whether they would fight, but what they were fighting for. The people, the countless nameless souls who suffered the most, began to fear history repeating itself. They had rebuilt their homes, buried their dead, and tried to move forward. Now, they stood on the edge of another storm, wondering if survival was all they were ever meant to achieve. The land itself seemed to react, as though it remembered the chaos of dragons and war. Forests grew denser, storms more violent, and the seas more treacherous. It was as if the world refused to remain unchanged, rejecting the illusion of stability that had been imposed upon it. And so, the return began not with a single event, but with a convergence of countless threads, each one pulling tighter, each one leading inevitably toward a clash that would redefine everything once again. The game had never truly ended. It had only been waiting. With the return came not only a shift, but a complete unraveling of everything that had once defined the game. What had previously been understood as power, loyalty, and survival no longer followed predictable patterns. The old rules, those written in blood, sealed by crowns, and reinforced by generations, lost their authority almost overnight. Those who once thrived by mastering these rules suddenly found themselves lost in a landscape that no longer rewarded experience, but adaptation. It was not a continuation of the past, but the birth of something far more unpredictable, where uncertainty itself became the only constant. In this new world, the emergence of fresh faces brought with it a dangerous kind of energy. These new players were not shaped by the same fears that haunted their predecessors, nor were they restrained by the same traditions. They carried ambitions that burned brighter, often unchecked by caution. Some were idealists, believing they could rebuild a better world from the ashes, while others were opportunists, eager to seize power in a moment of chaos. Yet all of them, whether they realized it or not, were walking paths already stained by the consequences of those who came before them. Legacy, however, proved impossible to escape. Even those who rejected the past found themselves influenced by it in subtle, unavoidable ways. Names still carried weight, history still shaped perception, and old alliances, though fractured, left echoes that could not be ignored. For some, legacy was a burden, a shadow they could never outrun. For others, it was a weapon, something to be wielded carefully in the pursuit of dominance. In either case, the past remained an invisible force guiding the present. Power itself evolved into something far more complex than mere control over land or armies. It became something quieter, more insidious. Information, once a secondary tool, rose to become one of the most valuable currencies. Secrets could topple rulers faster than swords, and whispers could ignite wars before armies even marched. At the same time, the reawakening of unseen forces, magic, prophecy, and ancient knowledge, introduced elements that could not be easily understood or controlled. Those who learned to navigate both the tangible and the intangible found themselves rising above the rest. Beyond the familiar territories, distant lands began to stir with intent. These were places long ignored or dismissed as irrelevant, yet they had been watching, learning, waiting. Their cultures, their armies, and their beliefs were vastly different, shaped by histories untouched by the conflicts of the known world. Now, as the balance shifted, they saw an opportunity, or perhaps a threat that demanded action. Their entry into the game did not simply add new players. It expanded the board itself, transforming a regional struggle into something far more global and unpredictable. Dragons returned not merely as creatures of legend, but as symbols of transformation and fear. Whether they existed in flesh or in memory, their presence reshaped the psychology of power. To possess a dragon, or anything that represented such overwhelming force, was to command attention, fear, and ambition. Yet history had already shown that such power came at a cost. Control was never absolute, and those who believed they could wield it without consequence often became its first victims. The dragon, in all its forms, remained a reminder that power could never truly be owned, only borrowed. As the stakes grew higher, morality began to fracture even further. Decisions were no longer guided by clear principles, but by necessity, fear, and survival. Those once considered honorable found themselves making choices they would have once condemned, while those labeled as villains revealed layers of complexity that blurred the lines between right and wrong. In this new game, morality was not a compass, but a shifting illusion, something that could be justified, redefined, or abandoned depending on the circumstances. The past, far from being a closed chapter, became an active force in shaping the future. Hidden truths surfaced with dangerous implications, exposing lies that had been accepted as fact for generations. Ancient prophecies, once dismissed as superstition, gained new relevance as events began to mirror their warnings. The more the truth was uncovered, the more unstable the present became. Knowledge, while powerful, proved to be a double-edged sword, capable of enlightening, but also of destroying the fragile structures that held society together. Amid all this chaos, relationships took on a heightened significance. Trust became one of the rarest and most valuable commodities, often forged in moments of desperation rather than genuine belief. Alliances were fragile, easily broken by ambition or fear, yet they remained essential for survival. At the same time, unexpected bonds began to form, connections that defied logic, uniting individuals from opposing sides. These relationships, though often temporary, had the potential to shift the balance of power in ways no strategy could predict. The idea of an endgame grew increasingly distant, almost abstract. Every victory revealed new challenges. Every resolution uncovered deeper conflicts. It became clear that there was no singular conclusion waiting at the end of this path, no final moment of peace that would justify the struggle. Instead, the game itself seemed to be the constant, a cycle of rise and fall, of creation and destruction, repeating in different forms across time. And yet, within this endless cycle, there remained a fragile possibility. The return was not only a resurgence of conflict, but also an opportunity, however small, to change the pattern, to learn from the past, to challenge the structures that perpetuated the game, and perhaps to imagine a world where power did not demand suffering as its price. But such a vision required something rare, not strength nor intelligence, but the willingness to break away from everything that had come before. In the end, the new game was not defined by who would win or lose, but by whether anyone could truly escape it. Destiny, once seen as something fixed and inevitable, now stood as something uncertain, something that could be shaped, resisted, or even destroyed. Yet in a world driven by ambition, fear, and the desire for control, the question remained, was anyone truly willing to let the game end?